Hi, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments.
The acoustic profile inside the subterranean pump chamber of Lock Complex 07 was a deep, waterlogged thunder. Situated exactly 30 meters below the churning tidal surges of the northern marine logistics basin, the monolithic concrete vault was an artificial cavern permanently slick with salt crust and dripping condensation. The air was thick, carrying the heavy, suffocating scent of wet sea silt, pressurized mineral oil, and the sharp tang of sacrificial zinc anodes corroding in the dark. Every 22 seconds, the main 5-foot directional spool valves shifted with a metallic subterranean clunk shutter that vibrated through the bedrock, a visceral reminder of the billions of gallons of displaced ocean water pressing against the high-tensile steel lock gates outside. Thaddeus Vance stood on the rusted grating of the lower drainage sump, his hand wrapped in a scarred, salt-hardened leather glove as it rested against the massive hydraulic actuator piston of Gate Lock 3. At 83 years old, Thaddeus was a rigid, unyielding anchor within the automated maritime network of Apex Marine Logistics. He wore his signature canvas field jacket, its heavy weave so encrusted with old marine grease, dried brine, and hydraulic fluids that it felt as stiff as the iron bulkhead surrounding him. Behind him, the sleek, waterproof casing of the Port Cloud OS telemetry terminal blinked with a steady, clinical neon purple light, streaming optimized docking metrics directly to the shipping company's corporate offices. Thaddeus ignored the digital array. His eyes were locked on an old, physical-mechanical differential pressure dial tapped directly into the lock's equalization conduit. The steel needle was vibrating within a narrow, 3-psi warning arc, a high-frequency flutter that the cloud's automated software completely smoothed out as routine tidal turbulence. To the corporate efficiency planners watching from their digital dashboards in the capital city, Lock Complex 07 was a model of maritime optimization. To capture the massive seasonal shipping bonuses before the autumn typhoons closed the shipping lanes, Silas Vance, the 27-year-old director of autonomous maritime corridors, whose corporate reputation rested entirely on cloud-managed vessel turnaround tracking, had deployed a remote firmware modification to the lock's massive hydraulic pumping grid. With a single administrative command executed from his high-rise office, Silas had compressed the mandatory lock equalization cycles by 45% while simultaneously accelerating the automated winching speed of the incoming megavessels. On Silas's centralized control board, the entire coastal hub glowed in a perfect, triumphant indigo, displaying a historic breakthrough in daily container ship throughput. Thaddeus, however, did not need a screen to know that the hydraulic system was suffering from catastrophic barometric hysteresis. He could hear it in the wet, erratic gurgling echoing from the deep pressure relief valves, the unmistakable acoustic warning of high-pressure fluid cavitation tearing through the internal Teflon seals. The accelerated cycling profile was forcing the massive pumps to reverse their flow before the internal pressure cells could naturally stabilize, creating millions of microscopic vacuum bubbles that were actively chewing away the hardened alloy faces of the main gate seats. The cloud-based digital acoustic monitors, calibrated exclusively for low-frequency structural shifts, remained completely blind to the cavitation erosion, reporting perfect operational efficiency while the primary hydrostatic seal of the entire 300-meter concrete basin was actively turning into a porous, honeycomb trap under 40,000 tons of lateral ocean pressure. The heavy, watertight steel door at the top of the chamber catwalk flew open with a loud pneumatic slam, admitting Silas Vance into the damp vault. He was dressed in immaculate, neon purple accented marine corporate utility gear, his spotless technical footwear and lightweight composite jacket looking entirely out of place against the salt-rimed concrete and greasy iron machinery of the lower pump platform. He held a custom, transparent field tablet that cast an aggressive blue glow over his sharp, impatient features. "Thaddeus!" Silas shouted, his voice strained as he tried to project over the deafening, echoing roar of the massive water-scavenging turbines. "The Central Maritime Dispatch has flagged Lock 07 as an unresolvable harbor bottleneck. Your manual mechanical lockout on the Gate 3 actuator has halted the entry of the Ocean Vector V100, a 100,000-ton automated container vessel currently idling in the outer channel. The ship's navigation computer is reporting a perfect tidal window, but your physical lockout is forcing the harbor tugs to hold her against a 6-knot current. Release the manual valve and clear the digital distribution manifest right now. Thaddeus didn't remove his glove from the iron lever. He used a short brass wire brush to clean a thick layer of green copper carbonate corrosion from the exposed manual bypass valve stem, pointing out toward the pitch-black drainage culvert. The primary gate seats are cavitating past their physical limits. Silas, your high-speed turnaround profile is running these massive pumps too hard without letting the internal pressures equalize. The hydraulic fluid is foaming. The barometric cells have lost their calibration baseline. You don't have a secure lock chamber. You have a failing pressure seal. If that 100,000-ton ship enters the concrete box with the current hydraulic instability, the sudden displacement surge will blow the main bypass seals and slam the outer gates directly into the ship's hull like a massive iron guillotine. Silas let out a short, highly contemptuous laugh, tapping his glass screen aggressively to display a real-time fluid dynamic simulation. Look at the port cloud analytics, old man. We are running a live, multivariable hydrodynamic simulation that samples water displacement, gate deflection, and pump pressure every millisecond. The structural safety index is holding completely steady at a stable 1.9 margin. The optimization software automatically adjusts the valve stroke timing to compensate for minor fluid foaming. What you're experiencing down here is just standard mechanical turbulence from an old installation. This corporation didn't invest $90 million in autonomous maritime logistics to have its highest margin port run blocked by an old dockhand who's afraid of deep water. Silas stepped closer, his boots crunching on the salt-crusted concrete floor as he lowered his voice into a cold, clinical threat. Let's be completely clear about where you stand, Thaddeus. Your technical field variance is being permanently archived at the end of this shift. If that manifest isn't verified and the gate released within 3 minutes, I am submitting an immediate emergency report for corporate sabotage and operational defiance to executive HR. I will personally terminate your senior medical coverage before midnight, cancel your housing allotment in the terminal settlement, and ensure you spend your remaining years sitting in the industrial dust of the outer rail slums. Sign the clearance or get out of my facility forever. The emergency confrontation did not wait for a corporate board meeting or a formal legal summons. It erupted exactly 70 seconds after Silas utilized his administrative master key to bypass Thaddeus's localized lock and force the Central SCADA system to execute the Ocean Vector V100 entry profile. Outside the chamber, the massive 300-meter steel hull of the automated container ship began to slide slowly between the narrow concrete walls of the lock, its towering walls of colorful cargo containers blocking out the low evening sky. Thaddeus didn't argue or attempt to struggle for the console. He reached over and flipped a heavy mechanical toggle on his local diagnostic panel, switching the main display wall from the stylized port cloud wireframe model to a raw, unedited hydraulic pressure transducer line feed connected directly to the internal piston core of Gate Lock 3. On Silas's transparent tablet, the digital ship icon continued to move smoothly along its pre-calculated trajectory, entering the lock basin with textbook precision. Watch the internal hydraulic fluid density on the primary actuator line, Thaddeus said, his voice entirely calm, steady as iron. On the raw analog line graph, the fluid density curve wasn't holding steady. It dropped in a vertical, jagged crimson dive as the pressure line spiked. The cavitated hydraulic oil, completely saturated with trapped air bubbles under the immense force of the automated override, had lost its structural compressibility. Under the sudden, massive water displacement wave thrown up by the entering 100,000-ton ship, the fluid turned into a useless, spongy foam. Within seconds, the pristine corporate interface on Silas's tablet began to violently glitch. The clean indigo dashboard fractured into a chaotic wall of amber and crimson warning blocks as a massive, destructive hydrostatic shockwave. The sheer weight of the ocean surge hitting the unsealed lock gates came rushing backward through the hydraulic system. It's just a temporary sensor lag. The cloud routing protocol will automatically modulate the auxiliary scavenging pumps to balance the basin level. Silas stammered, his fingers sliding uselessly across the frozen touch interface as the terminal began generating a frantic stream of low-level system faults. Actuator seal rupture, gate synchronization disconnect, critical hydrostatic failure. The software can't balance an ocean, Silas, when the primary piston rings have already sheared their teeth right off the cylinder sleeve, Thaddeus stated calmly, pointing a heavy glove toward the shaking iron bulkhead behind them. Out in the dark pump room, the sound of the machine completely changed. The deep, low-frequency hum was suddenly replaced by a sharp, deafening explosion of pressurized oil and seawater as the primary cylinder head on gate lock 3 failed structurally. Under the immense hydrostatic force of the ocean, the massive high-strength alloy gate arm snapped in half. The heavy, 100-ton steel lock gate swung completely out of control, its massive edge striking the side of the entering container ship with an impact that tore open the vessel's double hull, tilting the megaship violently against the concrete lock walls and instantly shorting out the entire basin's automated winching grid. Silas stood paralyzed in the freezing darkness of the leaking gallery, his transparent tablet shattered and covered in dark hydraulic grease, its screen completely dead. The Port Cloud platform was totally unresponsive, blinded by the physical destruction of the primary pressure sensors, leaving the harbor logistics network completely unable to safely halt the secondary automated container ships that were still steaming down the channel toward the blocked and collapsing lock complex. The system is completely dark. I can't reach the outer harbor signals, Silas whispered, his face pale with terror, his hands shaking violently as the emergency sirens began to wail through the concrete tunnel. The master server won't accept the emergency shutdown sequence from an unverified terminal. The server isn't listening because the physical fiber optic trunks were severed when the gate assembly smashed into the ship's steel hull, Silas, Thaddeus said calmly. He stepped through the spraying oil mist, reached beneath his salt-stained oak desk, and pulled out a heavy yellow protective container that was bolted directly to the deep structural steel of the floor. Inside sat an ancient, military-grade manual isolation switch box, a solid block of cast iron featuring a massive, uninsulated mechanical copper knife switch, and absolutely no digital logic or cloud connections. This is the Federal Maritime Infrastructure and Deepwater Kinetic Hazard Mitigation Act of 1982, Statutory Emergency Treaty No. 612. Thaddeus announced, his voice booming over the sound of the wailing sirens as he placed a thick, heavy green archival brief on top of the iron box. The cover was worn down to the raw cloth, featuring a massive crimson lead and wax seal impressed upon the lower margin. When your corporate optimization group redesigned the harbor interface code 4 years ago, they categorized all pre-digital manual emergency isolation protocols as obsolete legacy architecture to save on server compliance indexing costs. Thaddeus continued, looking down at Silas. They assumed that an automated marine terminal with a 99% uptime rating didn't need a physical, non-digital emergency cutoff. Thaddeus grasped the massive wooden handle of the copper knife switch. But this treaty contains an unappealable, non-expiring federal safety mandate. Section 12, paragraph 18 states explicitly that in the event of an unmonitored hydrostatic failure that threatens the structural integrity of a primary regional shipping basin, the senior field inspector holds absolute, unappealable authority to execute a total mechanical isolation. I am pulling the knife switch, Silas. I am throwing the high-voltage physical shunts. The outer harbor signal arms are dropping to absolute physical stop positions. The oncoming ships are frozen in the channel. And under federal law, because this catastrophic failure was caused by the deliberate bypassing of physical barometric restrictions, all operating and transport licenses for Apex Marine Logistics within this entire maritime corridor are immediately frozen, pending a full forensic excavation by government engineers. He slammed the massive copper blade down into the grounding blocks. A bright, blinding flash of green electrical arc lit up the concrete gallery as the main power feed to the entire lock complex's pump grid was physically shorted out and disconnected. The roaring mechanical echo of the distant turbines died instantly, leaving only the sound of the heavy ocean tide rushing safely out through the secondary emergency spillway channels into the open sea. 6 months later, the hypermodern, high-velocity administrative offices of Apex Marine Logistics had been completely dismantled, their slick glass desks and glowing holographic displays sold off at asset liquidation auctions. The corporation, entirely unable to honor its global shipping and trade supply contracts due to the indefinite, legally mandated freezing of its harbor infrastructure, had collapsed into a swift, devastating bankruptcy. The comprehensive federal safety investigation triggered by Thaddeus's physical treaty had exposed a widespread corporate policy of intentionally deleting cavitation and fluid friction warnings from the cloud logs to meet quarterly margins, resulting in severe criminal indictments for the executive board and the permanent revocation of the company's regional operating certificates. Lock Complex 07 was no longer a high-speed, throughput node. It was a quiet, strictly monitored hazardous engineering recovery zone wrapped in yellow federal warning tape. The massive cargo ships in the outer basin were silent on their anchors, and the subterranean lock gates were being slowly, meticulously cut apart with heavy carbon arc torches under the watchful eye of federal engineers to physically clear the shattered steel actuators. Thaddeus Vance stood on the concrete observation platform overlooking the main lock deck. The air was cool, clean, and entirely free of the toxic, suffocating smell of burning electrical insulation and melted valve packings. He wore his same canvas field jacket, though it now bore a heavy, polished brass insignia identifying him as the Chief Technical Trustee of the Regional Maritime Safety Bureau. The position was non-corporate, backed directly by federal statute, carried absolute operational veto power over any private terminal, and came with a permanent lifetime tenure that no executive board could ever threaten. A figure walked slowly down the concrete ramp from the access tunnel, his posture hesitant, defensive, and deeply humbled. It was Silas Vance. His pristine corporate uniform and high-tech utility gear were gone, replaced by a faded, generic blue industrial denim jumpsuit. His hands were chapped and stained with dark graphite grease, and he carried a heavy, manual ultrasonic metal testing probe on his shoulder. Following the criminal liquidation of his division, his technical credentials had been permanently flagged and blacklisted across the maritime registry, leaving him with immense personal liabilities and a professional history that no modern firm would ever risk touching. "Mr. Vance," Silas said, his voice quiet, raspy, and completely stripped of its former artificial corporate eloquence. He kept his eyes lowered, looking at the gray concrete near Thaddeus's heavy leather boots. "The Bureau's regional office. They told me that all manual labor assignments for the gate clearance crews must be personally vetted and signed off by your desk. I've applied for the entry-level position of third-class mechanical seal scraper for the lower basin hinges. I need the authorization to retain my family's basic housing permit in the harbor settlement." Thaddeus looked at the young man for a long, quiet moment, the silence between them punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic clink-clink of a manual chisel clearing out a barnacle block down on the lock gates. The lower basin hinges require manual sediment clearing and seal checking every Friday morning at 4 o'clock sharp. "Silas," Thaddeus said evenly, his voice steady as iron. "No automate de SYNCS, no cloud remindiers, no digital das guardas. If your hand slips or you fail to check the metal thickness with a manual caliper, a shifting 60-ton gate leaf could spring out and crush you against the concrete in a second. You report to the tool room on Monday morning at dawn. You'll be issued a manual canvas logbook, a brass caliper, and an iron scraping bar. If you can learn to respect the pressure of the sea and the reality of the iron without needing a screen to tell you it's safe, You might actually turn into a real marine engineer someday. Silas nodded quickly, a look of profound, desperate relief washing over his face. Thank you, sir. I'll be there. For a clock sharp. The fundamental flaw of the modern digital technocrat is the arrogant belief that because an industrial fluid process can be modeled in a multi-threaded cloud simulation, the physical laws governing that matter become flexible. A software interface can be easily programmed, calibrated, and manipulated to display whatever reality its creators require to protect a corporate metric. It can smooth over a critical mechanical vibration, it can ignore a dangerous barometric hysteresis event, and it can declare a catastrophic pipeline hazard to be an optimized success in order to protect a quarterly profit margin. The digital world is compliant, flexible, and completely indifferent to truth. But the physical universe does not negotiate, it does not compromise, and it does not read dashboards. 100,000-ton steel mass forced into a narrow concrete basin does not know who the autonomous harbor master is. A cavitating hydraulic fluid mass deep within a dark concrete gallery does not care about shipping bonuses, corporate branding, or velocity metrics. Hydrostatic head, fluid cavitation, and the unyielding laws of fluid mechanics are completely blind to human ambition, corporate titles, or cloud-based efficiency models. They cannot be ignored, they cannot be reasoned with, and they cannot be deleted during a server system update. When an organization begins to value the dashboard over the physical machine, its destruction is no longer a matter of chance. It is a simple matter of physics. The truth of the physical world will always assert itself against the simulation, and it usually arrives in the form of a fractured cylinder, a smashed lock gate, and an old field inspector with a physical book that your software forgot to index.